Okay, what's our topic? Family courts, and what do we want to call this episode?
Family court therapist.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Flying Monkey podcast. We have another episode here. We're going to be talking again with some of our favorite people and most experienced parental alienation experts, Dr. Bill and Matt from Hope in Darkness. You can find them at hopeindarkness.me, M-E. And today we're going to talk about therapists in the family court. So I'll start with you, Dr. Bill. Family courts rely heavily on the input of mental health therapists. In your work with alienated parents and children, do you see the influence of mental health therapists?
Uh, Most definitely. The work that I've done over the last 8 years, especially the research at the beginning, shows very clearly that the family courts have a heavy reliance on the input of mental health in order to inform the court on their decisions. Um, I would say that this is true in every country around the world, and that the problem with mental health therapists is that they have a perspective which really doesn't fit this specific problem, which we call parental alienation.
Okay. And Matt, what roles do you see mental health therapists playing in the family courts?
Well, it's kind of a strange animal, really. Um, the mental health industry was really allowed into court back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to explain some of the behaviors of criminals. They've kind of migrated beyond that role, and they're used almost exclusively in lieu of the decision making and the authority of the judge. I mean, you've got judges who are not who claim not to have knowledge or experience in mental issues, so therefore they defer the responsibility of that decision making onto third parties who are not a party to the action and really don't have until they do the authority of the court. So there's a heavy reliance upon mental health in the court system, and it's a dangerous proposition. It always has been.
Yeah, no, definitely. And the more people I interview, the more we find that out and see it. Dr. Bill, are mental health therapists effective in understanding parental alienation behaviors of children?
Well, they have um, probably a single-minded standard way of looking at what we call parental alienation. Um, they think of it as a shared delusion. They think of it in a variety of ways, which are very simplistic. And it misses really the main points. And as a matter of fact, it misses quite a few points. The and the important thing is, if you're going to convince a court in any meaningful way to change its orders to affect the welfare and ensure the success of the child, a simplistic observation or a simplistic explanation really doesn't work. The It's not just a behavioral issue. It's not a cognitive issue, as most mental health therapists work pretty much in the area of cognitive reasoning. What it really is a both a behavioral and a health problem, and that's something they don't seem to understand. And if you can explain both to the court, you can create the urgency. But in order to do that, you have to step outside of mental health, which does not train in the area that's really relevant to this, which is really it's a learning problem that children are being systematically trained to express behaviors that conform to the expectations of an abusing parent. And in so doing, it affects things such as the attachment system, affection. It also ultimately results in a lot of stress, and stress is correlated with obviously health concerns. And so both are important to understand, and neither is brought out in courts. And any of the courts I've been in, we're the only ones that do raise these issues, and it does get the attention of the judge.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Matt, what does the court do when confronted by a child or children rejecting contact with the other parent?
Most times they defer responsibility onto mental health, actually. Um, this is a very dangerous proposition because not only are they utilizing mental health to make recommendations, but they're oftentimes extending the immunity statutes that apply in the courtroom. These are decisions, very real, very serious decisions on the mental health, if you will, of a child is being placed on someone who has a financial tie to one or both of the parties, and has they're not taking an allegiance to the court or in support of any laws or rights that you may possess as an individual. So it's an extremely dangerous habit that we've developed within the court system, um, to explain something that really is very easily explained through the observations of the children's behaviors. Uh, you know, but certainly it's extremely dangerous, and it adds cost and complexity to an already complex system for a very simple problem.
Yeah, it definitely does. So, Dr. Bill, lawyers and courts often recommend parents to be evaluated. Does that lead to a better result for the court's ability to render a custody decision?
Absolutely not. This is where I have a lot of difficulty with bringing what I call the wrong tool into the court. The courts defer to mental health evaluations, and almost all of them, if the written part is a test called the MMPI, which is called the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And if you'll notice, the last two parts of that are called personality inventory. And I was familiar with this test for quite a few years, particularly in my younger years, and I saw the flaws in this instrument. But the real problem is it fails to address something which should be far more obvious to the court, and that is looking not at the personality of the parent, which basically is going to ultimately result in a label, which is basically what psychological testing and evaluations do. They result in a label. And a label can be very damaging to a person, can be very unfair, and there's really no way to fight against it. And we have parents who have been labeled unfairly and don't see their kids at all. So, what sense is it to evaluate the personality of the parent instead of the thing that is relevant, which we focus on, and we change the court's view of this. In every single case, we train our parents to go in, and our parents are trained in parenting standards. Now, doesn't it make more sense if you're going to look at a parent in relation to their child to look at a parenting standard rather than a personality issue? Because the parenting standard is something that can be validated scientifically on an observational timeline. So all of our parents, when they go to court, they're taking validated evidence, which not opinions, but validated evidence of the behavioral dynamics between the parents and the children. So what you're getting is something that's honest and truthful, undeniable, inarguable information that's relevant to the role of the person who is the parent, because everybody has a different personality. Isn't that true? Everybody in the court has a different personality. However, everybody isn't equal in terms of their parenting skills. And so we prefer to look at the parenting skills, and rather than looking at other issues such as what mental health is involved with.
Yeah, and to follow up with that, Dr. Bill, is there value in an alienated child engaging in reunification therapy?
Another problem in mental health is it's sort of very loose in its academic rigor. And I know a lot about this because as a young person in graduate school, I used to help edit clinical psych textbooks for the authors who I worked with. I worked with a number of people, and that one who was involved with about 72 textbooks. So I learned a great deal about the field of psychology from a mental health perspective at that time, even though that was not my direction. But one of the things I can say is that this very loose approach that is extremely robust in terms of grabbing labels and inventing new processes and giving those new processes labels. Reunification therapy is not taught in any university anywhere in the world. There's no standards for it. There is no certificate, no certification, in other words, for anybody who claims to do reunification therapy. There's no degree pathway in it. And I would have to say it's a complete fraud. And the courts somehow have adapted the idea that reunification therapy is real, and it's not. So this to me is a very, very serious concern because it rises to extreme ethical concerns. Besides that, those people who have engaged in it in our years working very closely with parents, and we probably had more parents than all the celebrity psychologists that are out there right now are working in this field because of the nature of our program. We have a lot of interviews with people. So we've had literally thousands of parents in interviews, and we have notes and data on every one of those parents. And there have been countless issues where we have seen episodes of reunification therapy ongoing with these parents. It has never succeeded. It makes the problem worse because it takes a child who is in a learning paradigm, practicing behaviors that are contact refusal, disrespect, and things like communication refusal, allowing the child to practice those behaviors so that they become more difficult to change. And so all learning is a function of time. And so the more time that you spend in therapy, the worse the problem is going to become because the therapist, in fact, there's no way the therapist is going to be able to address these problems, nor do they even try to. And the whole idea is to bring the parent in. I know the philosophy of this is to bring the parent into a room behind a closed door with a child and everything's going to work out magically. It doesn't work that way. These are behavioral problems. They have to be solved using behavioral techniques. And of course, we have a whole menu of behavioral techniques that we use that are very successful and work extremely fast. So, reunification therapy, again, in our estimation, is a complete fraud. It should never be ordered by anybody. And any therapist, any person who is in mental health, who professes to engage in such activity should have their license examined.
Very interesting. So, Matt, just maybe a little bit more about that. What alternatives does Hope and Darkness recommend as an approach to dealing with alienated children?
Well, first with any abuse scenario, you've got to remove the child from the situation that they're in. I mean, would you allow your child to play on a crowded street? If cars are having to swerve around them, chances are the best course of action is to remove the child from that situation. And that's kind of what this situation is with these kids who are embroiled in these alienation situations.
Yeah.
They really don't have a choice. And it's particularly disturbing to me because through reunification, what it presupposes is that the child is somehow responsible for the behavior that they're exhibiting. And it's, kind of like a carrot on a stick. If you're starving, you're going to go for the carrot. And that's the situation that these children find themselves in, is just that. And to place them at the center of this and presume that, forcing a child into a therapeutic program to help right their wrongs, is not a good strategy. It actually has much longer, further reaching consequences and implications later in life. So, I'm with Dr. Bill on this. This is a very, very serious situation. It's a band-aid on a gaping wound, and thus far,
Okay, so Dr. Bill, I got one more question here. Why should parents embroiled in alienation issues consider Hope and Darkness's approach instead of recommendations that they get from family court lawyers or mental health therapists?
Well, the approach that Hope and Darkness takes is based on my background working in the field of behavioral science, not in mental health, cognitive things, and that sort of thing. So the problem is, which is misunderstood consistently within the mental health community, and the lawyers don't get it, and the judges sure as hell don't get it. And that is the problem is a learning problem, like it is with all children. Children basically are influenced very easily, just as we are, and behaviors are conditioned. As a matter of fact, as B.F. Skinner used to say, all people basically their behaviors are simply a function of their behavioral conditioning. So children basically are in a learning paradigm from the time they're born. And the way in which they learn behaviors is a variety of strategies, and one of them is training the child. In other words, and that training can be done through role modeling, it can be done through instruction, it could also be done through a process called guided participation and some other methods. And so the child is in an agenda-driven circumstance with a parent who's generally very needy, generally insecure, has self-esteem issues, and it needs the child in such a way that the child becomes a security blanket for that parent. And so it's a very dangerous situation. And not to understand this through the learning paradigm and to simplify this problem as simply a cognitive problem that the child somehow, for whatever reason, that they can't explain and will never be able to explain, and don't even try to explain in most cases, is that mental health bringing their opinions in the court rather than hard evidence and common sense understanding of the behavioral circumstances that lead to all behavior, which is true whether it's a human or a rat or a skunk or a zebra or a monkey. They're all the same. The laws of learning are the same for all species. That is what accounts for the behaviors. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to be able to convince the court of the urgency to change the custody orders. And so our parents basically are trained very systematically to be able to go into the court and be able to explain in very clear, common sense terms, articulate exactly what is going on with their child, how the problem was created, and create the urgency that's going to compel the judge to be able to make a change. And that's a huge difference from taking opinions in the court that basically are guiding the court to do things that are virtually time wasting and, in fact, exacerbate the very problem they're trying to solve.
Well, yeah, I want to thank you guys for coming on today. It's been quite enlightening listening to your explanation of things, and I guess, I'm gonna start that again. All right,
You
guys. Well, thanks for coming on today. I really appreciate you being on the show. And one thing for our audience, how can people, parents going through alienation or kids that are dealing with this or anybody that wants to help someone that's in being alienated find hope in darkness?
Well, you can certainly find us online at www.hopeindarkness.me. That's hopeindarkness.me. And on the front page there, they can click for a consultation. We'll spend an hour with you learning what your circumstances are and talk to you about your particular situation.
Fantastic. All right. Again, well, thanks, guys. You take care, and we'll look forward to having you back on again soon too.